Well, hello, my friends. I have a special treat for you for the month of April. You may know this, but if you don't, now you do. April is officially Abortion Recovery Awareness Month, and I thought it would be fun to feature interviews from other women for the full month of April. So you're going to see us going back to 2 episodes per week, and you're also going to see more interviews with other women on the show. And today, I am kicking it off with a new friend of mine named Mary J. Browning. Mary J. Browning is an attorney licensed to practice law in Missouri. She had a private practice for almost 20 years, focusing on matters involving children and other family law matters. Mary is a litigator who has practiced in many circuit courts and in the appellate divisions of the Missouri Court of Appeals and in the United States Supreme Court. Mary spent 10 years in the executive department of Missouri, focusing on abused and neglected children, serving as the chair of the State Child Fatality Review Program, and as general counsel for the Missouri Department of Social Services. She currently serves on her local Pregnancy Help Center board and has done so for many years. Mary now works for the Justice Foundation as legal advisor to Operation Outcry Witnesses. In this role, she mentors women who've had abortions in their past and helps them share their stories. She also assists in writing briefs filed in the U.S. Supreme Court and other courts across the country. Friends, Mary is amazing, and I really truly believe you are going to absolutely love this interview and what she has to share. I highly encourage you to follow along with what she has going on, and I am just so excited to hear what you think of her story. So without further ado, here is Mary J. Browning on Does God Forgive Abortion? Are you struggling with the pain of a past abortion and longing for help but don't know where to turn? Welcome to the Does God Forgive Abortion podcast. I'm Brittany, an abortion recovery and mental health coach who went from feeling completely isolated and desperate in my post-abortion grief to achieving wholeness and freedom, all because of redemption in Christ. If you are ready to break free from the chains of shame and guilt from a past decision of abortion, you are in the right place. Let's crack open that Bible because it's time to receive the good news. Well, hello, everyone. We are back for another episode of the Does God Forgive Abortion podcast. And today I have a very special guest with me. I am so excited for you to get to hear from her. Mary, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, Brittany, thank you. I'm just so privileged to be a guest on your show. Thank you so very much.
Yes, thank you so much for agreeing to come on. I just know that this conversation is going to be one of the favorites for sure. I've been looking forward to this. I would love if you would kind of start just by telling us a little bit about, who you are and what you do, so the listeners can kind of get an idea.
Well, Brittany, I am an attorney. I licensed to practice in Missouri and have been for a number of years. I'm a litigator that I went to law school to advocate for abused and neglected children. So it's interesting that I find myself now in the area of advocating on behalf of the unborn and on behalf of women and girls who may be facing unexpected pregnancies, and for those of us who have been unexpectedly pregnant and had abortions.
Yeah, that's so amazing. And I just love the work that you're doing and how God was able to kind of connect us by, connecting us through podcasting, which is so cool.
Yes, I think so too.
Yes. So I would love to, if you would allow Holy Spirit to kind of lead and tell us your story, however much you are willing or want to share. Just give us that background into your story.
Well, Brittany, I was 18 and I was soon to be married when I found out I was pregnant, actually 6 days before my wedding. When I called the father and my fiance, his response was, "Well, you need to have an abortion." And at the time, I did not have a voice. I didn't even know my own voice well enough to contradict that. And I didn't have the relationship with my mother that I felt like I could go home and tell her and my dad by myself. So we actually cut our honeymoon short for the abortion. And I had never been to that clinic before. I didn't have an examination. No one described the developmental stages of the baby, and there was no ultrasound. I estimated the gestational age of my baby of about 12 weeks. The doctor came in and performed the abortion. And very early on, I was so traumatized that I dissociated from the experience. And I watched the abortion from the ceiling in the room in the clinic. After it was over, the doctor came in and scolded me because the baby was more like 16 weeks old. So my baby would have felt the pain and he would have felt the pain of the abortion. There's just no two ways about it. So he passed along, the doctor passed along his lack of health care to me. He blamed me, but he hadn't done an exam, hadn't tried to determine the age of the baby or any of those things. So I know that now. But at the time, I was pretty traumatized too by his treatment of me because I I did not expect that. There was no follow-up. I have After the abortion, I was plagued with migraines, extremely painful menstrual cycles, and endometriosis. At 35, I had a complete hysterectomy. And though the physical problems have been resolved, the pain of abortion still lingers. I have not had a successful marriage yet. I'm hoping to have, but I know now that difficulty in personal relationships is often an outcome of abortion. I didn't know that at the time, and I didn't know that for years, even though I was going through those things myself, until I really got into healing and got into places where people talked about abortion and what had happened after their abortions. So now I feel it's really important, Brittany, to speak out because younger women and girls who are facing unexpected pregnancies don't have the benefit of information from me and others that could help them inform their decision on what to do with an unexpected pregnancy. So thank you for letting me tell of my experience.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I think there are so many things in your story that the listener will find relatable. I know you know full well that so many women are not given, informed consent before this procedure. Uh, Doctors aren't performing exams. I know you have a lot of experience in what's going on with the chemical abortion pill and how, I mean, it's even less physician involvement. And so thank you so much just for sharing all of that.
Yes, Brittany, I'm glad you mentioned the chemical abortion because I think the public, as a rule, is really uninformed about that. It is so available on the internet now. It can be mailed anywhere, even to states where abortion is banned. Even though the FDA does require it to be taken only if you're less than 10 weeks in gestation, if the baby isn't more than 10 weeks gestation, there's no check. There's no check and balance on any of it. And the abortionists or the people providing the chemical abortions, those pills, those people tell women that they don't have to tell anybody that they've taken the pills. So if they find themselves in a desperate medical condition, which many do, they're told to just go to the ER and tell them you're having a miscarriage. And so I think they're really encouraging women to further this misinformation out in the public and in the cultural narrative, which is one of the reasons I feel like it's important for those of us that have had abortions to really get to the place where we can talk about our own experiences. So there's more information, more real and true information that people have and can filter that information into their own decision making, whether they're going to a voting booth or they have an unplanned pregnancy, or they have a friend or know someone that may be faced with an unplanned pregnancy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you mentioned that. And two, we were kind of talking before we started recording about the importance of being able to share your story, but also some things that we probably should do before we do that. So, would you mind kind of sharing some of your own experience on how you got to the point where you could begin to do that?
Well, yes, Brittany. I do think it's important for people to have a level of healing. And my own experience was that I had been seeking healing in different places. I went to counselors. But I never told the counselor that I'd had an abortion. I wasn't connecting the challenges I had in my life with the fact that I'd had an abortion because I had the impression that this is a simple kind of a routine kind of thing that you don't there's no worries in the future about a decision that you make. And I discovered along the path that I had, particularly in challenges in relationship, that I needed help and I had difficulties. I had low self-esteem. I was in a physically abusive relationship with an alcoholic. And so there's all kinds of different challenges that I had in my life that drove me to seek counseling and then different types of inner healing. And I did that through different types of, I went to something called Ancient Paths. And that was when the Lord really opened up the path for me to really examine the abortion, because I didn't go there even thinking about that or that that was something that would come up. But in that experience I had with the Lord, He even revealed the gender of my baby. That's how I know I had a son. And He told me his name, which He gave the name of Raphael, which I'm not Hispanic. It's not a name I would have naturally chosen. But when I became pregnant after the abortion, I had my first child. I was a girl and I wanted to name her Gabrielle. So I felt like it was very intimate that the Lord chose a name that also was kind of an angel name. And so and he would have known that, but there weren't very many people that knew that. So just the intimacy and the love that God showed me in the midst of that place where He was telling me, one of the things He told me is that I had my own pain. And He told me that my mother didn't want me, but I was not a mistake. And it took me a while to transfer that on to my own son, that I had treated that way. I actually did want my son, but I didn't know how to manage that in the face of having my son's father not wanting him, and then me not feeling like I could go home to my parents and receive support. And I didn't want to humiliate them and embarrass them or the members of the church. It's kind of a weird thing that goes on, that went on in my brain. So later, when the Lord told me about my own life and some of the things that I needed to have an answer for, about I wasn't a mistake, and my son wasn't a mistake either, even though he had been aborted. So that was one of the biggest things that happened early on. After that, I went through a number of inner healing processes, but I went to something called Rachel's Vineyard, and I just did that about a year ago. And I thought I'd done a lot of healing and had done a lot of work on the issue of the abortion and really accepting the forgiveness that God has for me and for others like me. But in that particular setting, I realized that for the first time, I was in touch with the loss. So I felt guilt and shame and remorse, but I hadn't really grieved for my son, if that makes sense. So I just say there's just so many different layers. And I've heard other people say, I didn't feel like I had the right to grieve because I was involved in my son's demise. It never even occurred to me to grieve. I mean, I was sad and felt shame and I felt remorse, but to really say, look at what I've missed, who he could have been in the world and what he was intended to carry here. And then whether he would have married and had children of his own. So there's a whole realm of experiences that I could be in touch with the loss of what abortion had meant to me and to his sisters, because my son has the two daughters that I did birth are full siblings to the son that was aborted. And so I've heard other people that had similar experiences, and I've heard of a number of experiences, as you know, Brittany, because of the different places I had the opportunity to be a part of. And in hearing that, I've come to think of abortion as as similar to fingerprints. They have similarities, but they're all just a little bit different. They're pretty personal for each one of us. So that's part of my healing journey, but also speaking out about it, meeting other people who have had abortion, like yourself, and people who have. There's one thing to say, I know I'm forgiven and I accept that, but there's a whole nother level when you're able to drop the shame and really believe that when Jesus died, he covered my sin, even that one. And so I would say there's a level of freedom, and it seems to me to be expanded, at least it was for me, by meeting others who have walked a similar path. We've all gone through this experience of abortion and come out on the other side, wanting other people to know this is a choice that you need to have more information about, but you need to know the consequences, the long-term consequences, and the regret, and how you get and filter that into any decision you might make.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I think one thing that I kind of want to point out what you said is you did a number of different healing uh, processes. And I think sometimes we look at healing as, we look at the different, even post abortion healing resources that are available, which are amazing and so helpful. But we look at them and we think they're kind of just a one and done. Oh, I'll just go through this one Bible study and I'll be good. But even you mentioned how you went through Rachel's Vineyard a year ago. And you've been doing this work for it hasn't only been a year. So it's important to remember that I think really on this side of heaven, we're always going to be healing. We're never going to be fully healed until we're with the Lord. And it's fully great and okay to go through multiple processes to continue to heal your heart while we're still on this side of heaven.
That's a really good point, Brittany. It was a long time. I was seeking healing for all kinds of things, not even realizing there was healing resources, or there were healing resources specific to the experience of abortion. So once I began doing this work and I started hearing about it, I still thought, well, gone through a lot of healing. I think I'm good. So when somebody else suggested, well, just go because you're going to be talking to other people, and then you'll have that experience and you can let them know what it's like. I was blown away because there was more to deal with. As you said, we are still sort of in the process of healing. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Would you say too that when you share or when you're working on the things that you're working on, do you think that that has a healing aspect too?
I do. I've never done any, there are online, I've done some follow-up online, but I've never just done a Bible study by myself, or done online healing for abortion recovery. So I don't know what that would be like. Part of the benefit is meeting other people, hearing their stories, sort of linking arms, and, we're going through this together, we're healing together. And even though each of our experiences have different factors and have evolved in different ways, we all have some similarities in terms of our pain and our regret. I was fortunate enough not to have, alcohol or drug addiction or those kinds of things. But one of the things that I did have was workaholism. So it was more socially acceptable to be a workaholic, although it still impacted my family. And so at the time, I didn't know what drove me. I knew I had a passion, and I thought I just had a passion for advocating for abused and neglected children. And then, as you may know, I'm an attorney, so I was a litigator and had a vibrant practice for a long time. And so doing that really felt like it was kind of noble work. But in hindsight, on this side of more healing, I can look at that and say, I was trying to prove that I had value, that I had worth. And I was still at that time carrying a secret for the most part, that other people didn't know that about my life. But I carried it and subconsciously was working to prove my value and worth in the face of having had an abortion. And so it affects us in different ways.
Yeah, for sure. And you described it earlier as kind of like a fingerprint. And I love that description because it's so true. There is no one story that is exactly the same. And that, again, is why it's important to, lean into what God maybe wants you to do and share, for sure. Okay, I know what you're thinking. You're hesitant to share your story with a stranger because they will never understand the anguish that you carry daily. I can't confide in a stranger for an entire hour. What if I cry too much? What if she thinks I'm absolutely insane? Friend, I am just like you. I do not love the thought of being vulnerable in front of others, but I can tell you right now that I wouldn't be where I am today if I wouldn't have just gone for it, if I wouldn't have let the walls come down. So, here's an overview of what exactly you get when you begin to work one-on-one with me in an abortion recovery breakthrough call. Our first meeting will consist of me getting to know all about you and your story. We're going to dive deep into the different problems that you are facing due to your shame and guilt. You'll leave our 1-hour meeting with some tactical strategies to help you dig deep into your individual struggles and emotions. And you will also leave with my free abortion recovery journal prompts and Permission to Grieve devotional. Now, sometimes one meeting is enough, but many women decide that they want to continue moving through the healing framework. So, when we meet again, we'll begin to move through the next steps so that you can address your individual struggles based on what the Bible says and how God wants us to move forward. You will leave each meeting with resources, a recording of your session, and all of the notes that I take during our time together. I am truly here to walk alongside you so that you can find wholeness and peace in Christ. Now, what are you waiting for? Stop allowing the enemy to keep you from finding the healing that God has for you. You can book your first call with me at brittanypoppy.com/coaching.
I know you asked the question about what it's like to share or what it's like to be in the healing process. So I know for some people it's very they can go through that online study, or they do that Zoom study, which can be helpful. You at least get to see and interact with other people. I want to encourage any listeners that if you're on the other side of abortion and wondering or recognizing that you need healing, that you might want to consider some type of in-person where you can actually see and maybe give hugs and receive hugs and cry together if that comes up. It was helpful to me, I'll say that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so often we want to try to do it by ourselves, or, virtually, there's more virtual options now, and those are great. It's not nothing, but there is so much to be said about that community aspect in person for sure. And I think that that's really biblical too. God calls us to be in community with others and healing alongside others. So I love that you mentioned that. Absolutely. And I just love that you've shared so much kind of about, your story and your healing. I would love for you to kind of talk more about your involvement in the pro-life movement and kind of, more specifically about what you're doing there.
Thank you, Brittany. I might mention that have not always been pro-life, in the sense that thought I was sort of pro-choice. Now I see that very differently. And then I evolved to the point, well, I no longer agree with that, but I wouldn't want to tell another woman what she had to do or what her choices were. So to come full circle, and part of that is getting to the point of actually being honest, not only with myself, but with others about my own experience, because I had tucked it and I was having difficulty in my personal life. I had a successful professional life, but difficulty in my personal life, and not connecting the dots to that decision and that experience. So at the time when I I had a good friend that's very pro-life, and she was working with the Justice Foundation, which is a group that gives opportunities for women and men to sign a declaration about their abortion experience, and then those declarations are utilized in support of pro-life positions in cases across the country. And she was telling me, she was encouraging me to speak out and speak up, and I began volunteering with the Justice Foundation in writing briefs in the U.S. Supreme Court. And so on behalf of women who had experienced abortion and who had pain from that. And so that was a beginning for me. And actually, I came across a brief where there were a number of women attorneys saying they could not have been successful if they had not had their abortions, because they needed to do that to get through law school. Well, I had had an abortion before I ever started school. So I had, it was weird because I also went through law school with two little girls. My daughters were 1 and 5 when I started law school. So I felt like it's really a lie to think you cannot pursue your education or your professional goals with children in tow. And so I wrote my own experience. We were looking for other attorneys who could say something. So we would have a brief of a number of lawyers saying that, and we couldn't find any others besides me that were part of the group the Justice Foundation had access to. So I wrote my own story. And in the process of that, Brittany, even though I had been through healing, I hadn't examined the details of my own experience. And that was when I first realized that I had dissociated. I always knew I watched from the ceiling, but I didn't pay attention to that necessarily. So when I'd heard other women talk about the pain or the sound or different things that they had seen, and I thought, why do I not have any of that? But when I really examined my own experience and realized my body was so traumatized that basically I left the building, as they say. I didn't leave completely the building, but I left the experience and watched. So I didn't feel, I wasn't in tune with what was happening to my body. And that really evolved in the process of writing that particular brief to counteract and to say, you can do this. This is my story, but I did have children in law school when I went to law school, and I was able to complete law school. So I wanted to counteract the fact that women thought they could not pursue their dreams if they had their children. And interestingly enough, part of my professional life was part of what I did in litigating was also doing adoptions. And so I had this beautiful and rich experience of working with parents who wanted to adopt and weren't able to, or those stepping in places where their own family member had a child, but like I represented a number of grandparents and aunts and uncles and different people who were stepping in to raise children whose parents couldn't. And I saw how beautiful that was, and I loved doing that. But to be honest, Brittany, most of the time I was doing that, I was never connecting the dots. Why I had passion and why that felt like purpose. And so that was a great part of it. But when as I began working with the Justice Foundation and working on the amicus briefs, I learned more and more. And that's when I met other women who had abortion experience, and other women, not that just had abortion experience, but no longer carried shame, knew they were forgiven, knew that God did forgive them, and that telling the story is a testimony in terms of talking about the forgiveness and then saying the regret and what the repercussion was. And now it fuels a passion to be involved in pro-life. So that's part of what I do. So you may know now I work for the Justice Foundation as the legal advisor to Operation Outcry. And Operation Outcry is the structure that gathers the declarations. So if you go onto operationoutcry.org, there is a declaration there that can be signed. And that's one way you can begin to lend your voice. If you have listeners out there, Brittany, that are thinking, gosh, I'd like to tell my story. This is a way to do it, um, and have the telling of it reproduced and magnified by being utilized in briefs. We've filed 5 briefs in the Dobbs case, which, as you know, reversed the Roe decision. And we just recently filed a brief on behalf of 138 women out of that were hurt by Planned Parenthood specific abortions from South Carolina, related to that state's position on not funding Planned Parenthood any longer. And so there's just different ways of lending your voice. So for me, I've become active, but the greatest joy that I get in all of this is meeting other people who are on the other side of this, and watching them grow as they evolve to the point of being able to talk about their experience without shame and with purpose and power. It's really a blessing in my life.
That's so amazing. And just a testament to what God can do with our pain. He can work all things together for the good of those who love him. And it doesn't make, certain things good, but he can use anything for good. Literally nothing is ever wasted in his kingdom. And I will make sure that the link to those declarations that you mentioned with Operation Outcry, I'll make sure that that link is shared in this episode's show notes. So listener, if you're listening to this and that interested you, please go to the show notes, click that link. You can check out Operation Outcry and sign your own declaration.
Brittany, I might mention too that also on the Operation Outcry website, there are a number of healing resources. So if someone's listening and thinking, well, I might need to tap into a healing resource, you can call, I think there's optionline.org and there's H3 Helpline, and both of those can help you connect with an abortion recovery resource near you. And I think that's really beautiful that we can get the word out on that. And I appreciate you letting us do that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that too, because I think some women go to Google, and I think Google likes to try to hide some of those resources. So going directly to a source that can help you find them is so much more helpful.
Yes. I didn't even know it was called abortion recovery. I don't even know if I would have known what to look for had I gone out looking. And yes, and so I think it's important that people know there is specific help.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Yes, thank you for mentioning that. So I would love to kind of ask you, what are some of the more surprising things that you've learned in the work that you've been doing?
I would say one of the surprising things, and this is the details of the chemical abortion, the chemical abortion pill process. So I don't know if you've had anyone on your podcast that's talked about the details of that. Because we talk about the abortion pill as if there's one, but there are actually 2. And the FDA originally had a number of protections in place for the women and girls that would be affected by these drugs. And they removed all of the protections that were there. So some of those were, there was a requirement of a first in-person meeting where there was a determination of how far along, what's the gestation of the baby. In the beginning, it was up to 7 weeks. Now the FDA lifted that to up to 10 weeks. And there was a requirement that there was an ultrasound to make sure you were pregnant and the baby was not too old. That no longer exists. And there was also the protection that that first pill would be taken in person and in the clinic, so that if there was an adverse reaction, that would be known right away. That's removed as well. The second set of pills, so the first pill actually starves the baby, and the second pill expels the baby. So the first pill is designed to cause the baby to release from the attachment within the uterus. So that takes the nutrition away. And the second set of pills then, as I mentioned, is designed to expel the baby. And a number of women, a high percentage of women end up needing urgent medical care after that, because sometimes parts of the baby are left inside and there's infection, and some women hemorrhage and they run the risk of bleeding to death. And so there's just a number of things that happen, and the protections that were in place. So it was originally determined that the first pill would be taken in the clinic. The second pill, then the one that would expel the second set of pills, the ones that would expel the baby or designed to expel the baby, those would also be taken in the clinic. And then there would be a third one, which was a follow-up to make sure that all the contents within the uterus were emptied so there wouldn't be an infection. All of those protections are gone. And so I think we have so many women at home unprepared for what they discover in their own bed or in their own bathroom. And we have one of the things I've learned from the helpline coaches is they get calls with women hysterical, not knowing what to do with their baby. And some of them put them in the freezer. Some of them, when the ground is frozen, they can't bury their baby. Their inclination is to want to bury the baby, but they can't. So they freeze the baby till the ground's, thawed enough to be able to bury the baby. Some Planned Parenthood, if they're asked, they'll tell them to flush the baby down the toilet. Of course, they don't actually admit that there is a baby, but they say, flush the contents down the toilet. And so some women have this experience, and the baby's heart is still beating. They can see the heart beating. So there's just a number. I think that's one of the surprises for me working in this is the degree to which this is touted as healthcare, but there really is no healthcare being provided for the woman or the girl. There's also no age limit for what age a woman or girl could receive these pills and these drugs. And there is the biggest risk, a big risk, is that somebody else other than the pregnant person might not want the person to be pregnant, and so they'll put the pills in their drinks or somehow trick them into taking them. And so the girl or the woman doesn't even know that they're having an abortion. They don't know what's happening. So I think that's been one of the biggest surprises. And I am thankful that the pro-life community is working on ways in which to be unified and organized, because we certainly have, our opposition is unified and organized. And so, and one of those ways is that they can do that is because there's so much money going into the Planned Parenthood pot of money. And recently I've learned there were 700 million taxpayer dollars paid to Planned Parenthood. And they get about $2 billion a year, but they spend very little of it on the clinic, on what's happening in the clinics. They're using that money to hire lawyers and to influence politics. So, and I think some of that is the ads, the promoting positions that want people to think this is simple, this is ordinary, this is no big deal, and not giving women or even the fathers either, not giving the mothers or the fathers the full story about what happens and the repercussions, like what I know about now on the other side of this, after looking at my life and talking to other women who've had difficulties after abortion. So.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And two, I see them try to kind of come after us by saying, well, one or two stories isn't a big deal, but I'm sure you can shed light on the fact that this is not one or two women that have struggled with this. This is multitudes of women that have struggled with all of this negligence, really, that they are committing.
There really are multitudes. And I think as the word gets out, as it will get out in this podcast and other podcasts and other ways in which we're finding to inform the public, because it's not been happening in the media. The media seems to be very pro-abortion. So we don't hear a lot about what you and I are talking about today. But I think it's very important that we do make that we're intentional about making sure the general public hears the full story and why. I think why you're doing this, why I do this, because we want people to know the whole story, not just the pieces that serve a multi-billion-dollar industry. We want them to know the pieces of the puzzle that they need before making a decision. And in my world, sort of, as I mentioned, I did a lot of adoptions. The idea that there's so many children that loving couples would really be so excited to be able to raise. And so I'm part of a bigger coalition now, a national coalition that talks about adoption as the third option, because we think about raising the baby or aborting the baby. And I don't know that there's a lot of information. There's a lot of misinformation or misunderstanding really about adoption and the differences in adoption today than it was years ago, that there are ways of staying, at least being informed of the child and sometimes still having interaction with the child, even if you're not in a position to raise the child, and you can choose, sometimes you choose the prospective adopted parents. And so that's pretty neat. You could choose, if you're not in a position to raise your own child, that way, that child has a future. And so do you. You have a future that has less trauma than on the other side of abortion.
Yes, absolutely. I love that you said that too, because I think that is kind of the typical thought process. Adoption doesn't seem to really be on the table for a lot of people, but I think that it's such a beautiful thing. I have a friend who worked in adoptions for, I want to say 20 to 30 years. She might listen to this episode and be like, no, it was longer. So it might have been longer. But she talks about it as one of the most sacrificial forms of love that any person, any woman can have for her child. To, she likens it to what Christ did for us on the cross. He sacrificed himself for us, and these women are giving their children a life, instead of choosing a more an option that wouldn't give them life. They know that decision doesn't come without pain, but that it's such a beautiful sacrificial thing to do for these children, that they can have life. And so I love that you mentioned that. It just reminded me so much of my friend.
I'm glad you told me that story, because it just reminded me that I used to tell the birth mothers that I worked with that I would watch them, and it was sacrificial, but to me it was a very strong and powerful act of love.
Yeah.
To say, I love this child, but I recognize I don't have what it takes at this time, but I can tell these people do, or I am willing to let go so that my child can have a future. And that is so powerful. And it is sacrificial. I'd never heard that connection like Jesus on the cross, but it is. I've seen that sacrificial love.
Yeah.
And thank you for telling me that particular story, because wow.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't tell it as well as she does. She has such an eloquent way of sharing her life's work, but it just, when you were talking about that, it reminded me of that. And I wish people looked at it more in that light, instead of just not even allowing that decision to be on the table for so many people. So,
Yes, and maybe as we talk about it, maybe more people will come to realize that that's an option that's more palatable than abortion.
yeah,
That it
absolutely.
may not, that it has not been in a favored cultural position, but there's no reason for it not to be. I think I heard a statistic not too long ago, like most of us know someone that's either been adopted or has adopted, or that has relinquished a child for adoption. So, it's generally we have some kind of connection with the adoption story. We're just not necessarily always aware or think about the role that could play if we had a more favorable general opinion of adoption and supported and promoted that. So,
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I'm going to pray that people who listen to this conversation will begin to share that as well, so that we can just continue to get the word out about so much that you shared, of course, with the truths about chemical abortion and all of these things going on, but also this adoption piece. Just there's so much good in this episode. I already can't wait for people to be able to listen. So thank you so much for all of that, Mary. Mary, I would love if you would kind of end the episode today by just telling us a little bit more about, where we can kind of follow along with what you're doing. So you mentioned that you work for the Justice Foundation and Operation Outcry. I would love if you would just kind of let us know, where we can follow along, where we could find you. And two, you co-host a podcast, so share more with us.
Okay, yes, I co-host a podcast with Molly White. It's called More to the Story: What the Abortion Industry Doesn't Want You to Know, with Molly White. She's the main host. I'm a co-host. So that we do try to interview different people that are in the pro-life movement and that see it and look at it from different windows. And so that's one way to follow along and learn. Also, the operationoutcry.org, you can log on to there. Or if you hear the story today and you have questions or you want to know, or you'd like to, at this point, you could reach me at m.jbrowning@outlook.com, and I would be glad to hear from you and encourage you. m.jbrowning@outlook.com is that email for me. So, Brittany, it is such a joy and such a pleasure to be on here. I am excited that you are doing this podcast because I'm encouraged by someone younger coming into the fight and recognizing at an earlier age the value and the importance of this. So I just want to, my hat's off to you and thank you, Brittany.
Yes, thank you so much, Mary. I'm just thankful that God gave me healing when He did, and just so thankful that He can use our experiences for the good of His kingdom. So, thank you so much again for coming on the podcast. And I'll make sure all of the information that you just shared is in the show notes for the listeners to get in contact with you if they would like. So, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Brittany.
Hey, beautiful friend, I hope that you found comfort from today's episode. If so, would you consider leaving a review wherever you are listening? It truly encourages me to know that this podcast has been helping you. Also, I want to remind you that we are here for you. If you would like to connect with a community of women healing from the past decision of abortion, please join us in our private Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Christian women healing from abortion. Please know that I continue to pray for you every day, and I am so thankful for you. I will meet you back in a few days for a brand new episode, but until then, take care and God bless.